Welcome to episode 5 of Behind the Grind. I'm your host, Julianne Q. Today's guest, Graeme Barlow, sold his first company at 16 for $1 million. He's now 30 and the CEO of Iversoft, Ottawa's leading app development agency and one of the leading tech consultancies in the country. Graeme has a resume so impressive that I almost didn't even reach out to him for this interview. Behind the Grind is a series for entrepreneurs to open up about the more sobering aspects of their journey. And I originally didn't think to approach Graeme because in my mind, he had always existed on a different plane or something. I mean, he was a freaking prodigy after all. So it feels kind of ridiculous to me now recounting some of the preconceived notions that I had of him, because one of the key takeaways that you'll learn from this conversation is that no matter how much in life you think you know, there's always room to be surprised. I was surprised to learn that between the massive success of his first company and the massive success of his third was a second company that never really came to be, and that the experience of running this company and then losing it was responsible for some of the greatest lessons that Graeme has ever had the opportunity to learn. Here to share with us what those lessons are, and within the context of an honest look at his life, is Graeme Barlow himself. That was my introduction of you.
Awesome.
How would you introduce yourself?
I think it depends on context, and I've had a lot of opportunities throughout my life to kind of wear a lot of hats and be everything from kind of a motivational speaker to a leader to working with our staff and different teams and clients. And so introductions are kind of a reflection on your perspective of your narrative. And so when I'm usually asked to introduce myself a bit, I say I've been a serial entrepreneur for 20 years, for almost my entire life.
Right. But most people would start from the beginning and they would do it linearly. And like I said, at 10,
yeah,
you founded your first tech company in gaming.
Kind of out of necessity. I mean, at the time I was a huge addict of online games, had a ton of really good friends that I played various online games with at the time. I mean, we're looking at like Diablo 1, Diablo 2 around that time period. And it was kind of through the course of that gameplay, and at the time my dad getting big into scout badge trading on eBay.
What's that?
It's a really nerdy collecting hobby from kind of Boy Scouts world, but gave me kind of the insight into what was happening on eBay. And so when we started to have conversations about how much time I was spending on games and how much time I was spending in these online worlds, and I was able to kind of realize that there was value in the things that we were collecting online, and that people were paying hundreds of US dollars for these on eBay at the time. It kind of sparked an opportunity, and a group of us that were playing a lot.
So this is 10-year-old you thinking this, like, oh, this is an opportunity to capitalize on.
This is 10-year-old me seeing an opportunity to try and justify my way into playing more video games and trying to come up with elaborate reasoning on why there was value created in sinking hundreds or thousands of hours into video games, and it turned out to be pretty valid. I think over the course of 6 years, kind of from that point, myself and a whole group of friends that all knew each other through online games got into building fairly rudimentary software and bots to exploit economies on different games, ranging from some of the most competitive games in the world at the time, like EverQuest, to weird niches like Neopets.
A niche? That was the first game I ever played.
It was a lot of people's first games, and like a massive economy was there. And so we kind of built up this whole group of just generating currency on them, and then using eBay, using trading sites and forums, and kind of the like early days of the internet black market to sell currency on every platform we could.
What was an average day in your life back when you were, let's say, 14? Like, so your parents basically let you do this They left you alone at the very least.
At the very least, they left me alone. There was very little interaction between my kind of normal go to school, be a kid life and the world that I was living in online. And I mean, that was kind of my first view into how strong relationships can be online. I mean, to this day, of kind of the 7 of us that were part of this group, I've only ever met one of them in person. The rest was all digital for years and years and years.
But yet you think of them as friends.
Absolutely. Well, I just got married this last year, and the best man, one of the best men at my wedding was a friend that I met playing World of Warcraft 12 years ago. And I met him when I was 17, and he was doing his master's in physics. And we've been really, really, really close friends ever since. So I think the relationships that can come out of online interactions are absolutely valid. I'm a huge champion of the fact that the things we learned in managing economies and kind of supply and demand and trading in EverQuest and World of Warcraft, Diablo, Neopets, everything, all of those principles apply to business everyday entrepreneurship, marketing, branding, positioning, and are incredibly valuable. And I mean, even the effort of leading gaming teams and leading gaming communities, coordinating 40 people to do something at any given time, have tremendous transferable ability into kind of the real world. I have no formal business training outside of kind of an accounting course I did in high school. A lot of what I know and have learned has come from the gaming world and come from what I did early on with Snow Currency.
So 16.
Yep.
How did you sell that company?
So I mean, for us at the time, we had been doing this.
What was it called?
It was called Snow Currency, and I mean, company is a bit of a stretch. It was kind of a loose collective of friends that were actively doing this, running everything through PayPal, running everything through essentially hoarding currency in games and keeping it on those accounts. And the sale came about when we started to see some people doing similar things in the States. And at the time, the laws were changing around what cybercrime was and how that was defined. And there was a pretty famous example at the time, a group that was doing a bot called WoW Glider on World of Warcraft. Got sued in the States and faced criminal charges and jail time. And we were starting to get pulled into the same world and realizing that for those of us in Canada, it wasn't a big deal, but of the 7, there were only 2 of us in Canada. The rest were either in the States or Europe. And we were facing a scenario where there could be really significant consequences for what we're doing, and we were way beyond our depth. And so there's actually a group we'd been working with out of China for a number of years leading up to that, kind of the old cliche of the Chinese gold sellers in a lot of games. Early on, when they were breaking into that market, they were buying from the botting community. And so we'd been selling currency on different websites to some of the Chinese selling sites, because we could have one customer and do one transaction, and they would deal with having thousands of customers. Right. And so around that time, we reached out and said, look, we need to get rid of all of our accounts across all the games. We need to get rid of all of our currency. We need to walk away from this. And so, yeah, over the course of about 2 months, they kind of moved money around, moved currency around for us, and we were able to walk away.
Was $1 million the amount they offered you? How did you settle on that?
A lot of it was tied to the value of the accounts we had. Right. So we'd purchase, if you have a World of Warcraft license, it costs a certain amount of money to buy the game and then have a subscription. And so it was just the volume of accounts that we were dealing with that they were taking over. That was the transfer. And so the $1 million is kind of the exciting number in the story, but when there's 7 of you and you're also looking at all the costs that went into getting all the accounts and managing all of that, the actual money you walk away with it is quite different, but
even so,
still pretty cool.
So what, you would have been in grade 11?
Yeah, I think so. Grade 11, grade 10 or 11, yeah.
So take me back to after this sale.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? You're now in grade 11. You have, a bunch of money in your bank account.
We have a bunch of money on the internet. Very different, right? At the time, we have a bunch of money on the internet in a bunch of different games and on different PayPal accounts that we generally got illegitimately because none of us were old enough to have a real PayPal account. And so it's kind of like having tons of money virtually and very, very little that translates into the real world.
Right.
But what it gave, for better or worse, I think was a bit of inflated sense of accomplishment and ability. And so a lot of that led to just being kind of really confused going into grade 12 and trying to figure out what to do with my life and where to go. I think there's no...
I would imagine you probably thought I could do anything.
Not really, because like I didn't discover the word entrepreneurship until almost my first year of university after I'd moved to Ottawa. I mean, my mom growing up was always an entrepreneur. I didn't really know what that was. I just knew small business owner. And so I think there's no greater evidence of like the lack of direction than the universities I applied to and the programs I applied to. Because I applied to political science at Carleton, history at York, game design and entrepreneurship at UOIT, law at U of T, and it was like just all over the map.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Literally. And then I got back the best offer from Carleton. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Where's Carleton? I was like, oh, all right, Ottawa. Came and visited the school and fell in love with the city. And so, yeah, started university, went to Carleton, and the rest of Ottawa is kind of history. It's been a whirlwind ever since.
So you were in Carleton for how long?
I think official transcripts say a year and a half. I think reality is probably closer to 3/4 of a year.
What was your plan when you were at Carleton? Surely you must have had some idea.
So the grand plan was go to university, study international relations and law, or international relations and social psychology, and then go into cyber law and go after people
like
and
yourself.
like myself or
Why
defend.
would you do that?
I don't know. It seemed fun. And I figured in order to deal with kind of law on the internet, you needed international relations because everything crosses borders. And from everything I'd kind of experienced my whole life online is if you understand how crowds behave, how kind of groupthink happens, then you get a bit of insight into how communities evolve and shift and how you can kind of manipulate them. And so I got about 3/4 of the year into that in university. Was going well, but then got super bored and realized that the path I was on was going to be another 7+ years of university, and I just couldn't see myself doing it. And at the same time, I had kind of this like number of events in my life kind of collide together. I got a book from my mom at the time that was all about kind of defining success and defining happiness for yourself.
What was it called?
It was the Success Principles by Jack Canfield.
Right.
I've never finished the book. I only got halfway through and dropped out shortly afterwards. And at the same time, another friend of mine in Waterloo had just gotten involved with a group called Impact Entrepreneurship. And she was all fired up on the whole entrepreneurial community and the startup ecosystem, and it was kind of like coming home. I went to one of the events in Waterloo, and it was like finding my people for the first time. And it was like, oh my God, this is the community I need to be in. This is what I want to do.
Right.
And so that's when I started a company called View and Media, which was kind of the like stepping stone between Snow Currency, which actually did things. View and Media was kind of idea after idea after idea, and through that process, I met up with a ton of people in Ottawa in the tech community and other startups, and I was able to take some of the things that I'd learned from essentially running an online business to help them navigate social media, digital brand,
Right.
And promotion. And it was through the course of doing that I dropped out of university, stopped going to classes, and got the opportunity to co-found RocketOwl, which was our games company on Facebook.
Right. So in its last iteration, you were a consultancy.
Yeah.
What
So I've
was
come
it
full
called?
circle. It's called View and Media. Terrible name. It was the combination of view and win.
Right.
View and the original idea had been this big video ads play where people could watch ads, get currency, use that currency to play lotteries and win. And it was a great idea if you didn't know anything about development and the legality of contests and everything else.
Yeah.
So
I mean, just hearing that,
Yeah,
I was
it
like,
died.
that sounded like a great idea. And then RocketOwl.
yeah.
How did you meet your co-founders? So by now, how old are you?
21.
21.
So 21, and RocketOwl kind of came about in a crazy, weird thing. Like a huge theme of everything I've done in my life is based on kind of show up when almost you don't want to, or you get that gut of like, oh, I could find a million reasons not to go. Show up anyway. A good friend of mine invited me to an event at one of her advisors' houses, and it was late at night. It was, I think, a Friday night, and I was just like, I'm exhausted. I don't really want to go. But I went. All I had been told was it was a get together, really cool people were going to be there, and I should show up. So I was like, great. Per usual, me, jeans, hoodie, show up. I'm like, I'm here to meet cool people. What I didn't know was this was a fundraising dinner on behalf of an incredible organization called Company. And it was all kind of business leaders and executives from around the city and the country talking about how to raise funds to support military families. I think I was the only person in the room that wasn't in a suit and tie, so stuck out like a sore thumb. Had never been more kind of embarrassed and like wanting to hide in a room in my life.
Right.
So I was pretty much hanging back, and at one point the conversation shifted to what can we do to engage youth, and how do we kind of take advantage of this online community thing. And they opened it up to the room, and it was kind of like crickets and a bunch of really bad ideas. And I said, well, nobody's talking to me at this point anyway. What have I got to lose?
Dressed as a youth. I'm picturing this scene right now, and you stepping forward like, hello, as the only person
so I
wearing
just
a
kind of
hoodie
like
here.
from the back of the room, I was like, okay, well, I have some ideas, and started talking about it, and ended up going on like a 10-minute monologue of how to engage the youth and where things have been missed. And that one incident led to meeting one of my co-founders for RocketOwl that was in the room at the time. Met two generals that night with the Canadian Forces that led to some consulting work with the military on how to do their online video. And that kind of kickstarted a network that fundamentally changed the direction of everything I was doing, which was really cool. So the co-founder I met that night, Saul, he and I met up for lunch a couple days later and just got chatting about what did we want to do, what was he doing. He was a really successful patent litigation lawyer who was also an investor and was doing different things. And at the time, he was really, really passionate about solar technology and kind of environmental tech and a sustainable environment. And I asked if I thought games could be a good way to kind of teach people about that. And my first answer was maybe, but most games that are built for a purpose or built for a cause are terrible. So if you wanted to make a game that was going to actually make a difference, you had to make a game that was good and then look at how you can use a good game to drive a message. And that was kind of the seed of the idea that ended up starting RocketOwl. Was we were going to build high quality social games on Facebook that drove a positive impact, that dealt with renewable tech, that dealt with sustainable ecosystems, and partnered with NGOs all over the world. And to Saul's credit, he pulled the rest of the founders together. There ended up being 5 of us that co-founded the company. Craziest experience of my life of kind of like put together a pitch deck. And I think within 3 months, we'd raised $600,000 to start the company, got offices, got computers, hired developers, hired some designers, and started building Green Space, our first game on Facebook. And it was crazy. So it was a really interesting experience. I was involved in RocketOwl for about 4.5 years. We did 3 rounds of funding, raising I think a total of about $2.4 million. And really trying to find our place in the gaming space, and always on the philosophy of kind of go big. We're gonna like make this blockbuster title and take over the world. And that's kind of, if you go watch The Social Network, if you hear about Zynga or any of those companies, like that's the dream, that's what you should do. And so that's what we tried to do. And we had some really big wins and some really cool things happen across that journey. We got connected with this amazing rep at Facebook, and she ended up putting us on the homepage of Facebook's games page when that was a big thing, which I think led to the longest week of our development team's life, because we went from adding maybe 100 users a day to signing up 200,000 users in 48 hours. And literally every piece of technology we own broke and like blew up and died under the strain of it. And we spent that week fixing it and trying to keep up with that.
Right.
And ultimately the Facebook stuff led to us getting to over 1 million users and getting kind of global recognition. We got to work with some incredible nonprofits. But
1 million users on one game.
On one game. We only ever had one game. We had Green Space. Right. And it was kind of, best way to describe it is kind of like Farmville with renewable tech and an eco message. The whole storyline was humanity had solved the garbage problem on Earth by shipping it into space, right, which was cool. But then fast forward 300 years and we realized we've polluted every other planet in the solar system to an unrecognizable dump. And so the game starts out as you're this little space janitor in a spacesuit with a broom, and you've landed on kind of garbage apocalypse planet, and your job is to clean it up, salvage everything, and rebuild a civilization there, restore the planet.
Right. I mean, if there were 1 million users, I would imagine games are not personally my thing, but yeah. I would imagine, that being really sticky at one point.
It was, and I mean, like to this day, we still get messages on the Facebook group asking, is it going to come back? Can it happen again? And I mean, ultimately, unfortunately, on the RocketOwl side, we ended up getting kind of a soft-ish crash landing at the end in that an incredible entrepreneur here in town, Andy with Keshet Technologies, ended up taking on the IP to try and rebuild the game. But at the end of RocketOwl, we were doing a new funding round. We were trying to get to the next milestone, and everything just took longer and longer than we thought it would. And we thought we'd had funding closed, and after the date when it was supposed to have come in, it didn't. And then the investors backed out, and at that point we had done everything under the sun to hustle and kind of make it happen, and friends, family, favors, whatever we could do to make payroll and keep things going, we had done. And by the time we found out those investors weren't happening, there was nothing left. There was no, just wasn't the fit for them. Wasn't the fit for them. Like it was, for us at the time, we had users, but we hadn't figured out how to monetize. We were bouncing back and forth between making a couple $100 a day and $1,000 a day in and out purchases. So it was starting, but it wasn't there yet. We couldn't sustain ourselves.
What was the gaming industry like?
The gaming industry was taking off. Like this was kind of like the peak Zynga Farmville time on Facebook, where everything was going crazy, and if you could find the right formula and just make it work, things went nuts. Right. And it wasn't yet as crowded as it is now. But yeah, we'd gone through, this was effectively our fourth fundraising effort. We're calling it kind of a Series A, and we had gotten to an agreement with a group of investors, and they had done the first tranche investment, and we were waiting on the next tranche, and that didn't happen. They weren't excited about the direction we were going in or the kind of metrics we were putting out, but we were close, and so they said, like, let's wait for the next one, and if everything's good, we'll put double in on the next one. And we managed to get it to a pretty good place, but by the time that next milestone came, they just said it wasn't the direction they wanted to go, and they weren't interested in pursuing it anymore. And at that point, we were well beyond what any of us could do. A lot of us on the founding team, I mean, for myself, had gone close to 3 years without taking any salary or any kind of pay for anything.
How did you pay your bills?
Family, friends, was an extremely challenging time period, like that, but that's all in the philosophy, like kind of why I said I would be happy to come on Behind the Grind, right? At the time, we were still doing public speaking, we were doing these big events, we were like super excited in the community, but at the same time, we were doing everything we could to try and make things work and keep it growing and keep the momentum going. And
did you legitimately believe in the vision of RocketOwl?
Absolutely. Like I still think gaming is one of the most powerful mediums on the planet to engage people, to drive change, to motivate a generation that has maybe checked out on certain things. I think it's always interesting to me when People talk about school and academia and the current teaching methodology can't convey certain information, or certain people aren't capable of learning. But those same people can go home and learn complex formulas in Fortnite or in World of Warcraft, or do incredible coordination in a gaming environment when the motivation is right. And so I still fundamentally believe that gaming, gamification, and that whole ecosystem is one of the most powerful tools in existence for how you motivate and drive passionate response and learning. And it's a big part of what we do at Iversoft now. So I've come back to that world a little bit, but at the time, I mean, putting your entire existence into that vision, that dream, and I fundamentally believe that's what CEOs of startups have to do. But the part that doesn't really get talked about is that's a huge risk for you as a person, because if that doesn't happen, you're kind of left trying to refigure out what your identity is. And I'm a huge proponent of learn from failure. Failure is what teaches us the most. You learn a lot more when stuff blows up than when everything goes right. But saying those things, reading those books, reading the tweets from people about failure is one thing. Living through it and facing investors, facing family, facing friends, facing the world, after you've kind of identified yourself as this company, as this vision, as this thing, when that doesn't happen, that's extremely challenging.
What happened after RocketOwl failed?
I spent a lot of time lost, and I credit a couple of people with keeping me alive through that session. I mean, one of the biggest things is having a supportive partner. My girlfriend at the time, wife now, went through that whole journey with us of the hype of everything that was amazing with RocketOwl, the funding rounds, the ups, and then the downs. And so the support there was incredible. And support from friends and family, that was one of the most humbling things for me, is when we realized RocketOwl wasn't going to happen, and when we realized there was nothing else we could do.
But even more so frustrating and heartbreaking, because you just said you were still so aligned with your why, and you had this grand vision. From the way that you described it to me, it should have worked out, but it didn't. So how did you come to make sense of that?
Just because it should have doesn't mean it does, right? You can align, there's so many startups, you can align the best investors, the best team, the best technology, and have all the timing right. There are so many other things that go into startups and into making companies and products successful that even when the formula looks perfect, not everyone hits. I mean, this is why as a VC, you make as many bets as you do, because you bet on 10 perfect formulas, perfect teams, perfect environments that on paper are amazing, and you count on one of those 10 to actually make it, because there's so many other things that happen. And I think,
Isn't that such a sobering idea, that just because something should work out, it doesn't? I feel like if we were to jam that message down the throats of everybody who aspires to be an entrepreneur, I feel like we would get far fewer than we.
I mean, entrepreneurship is the art and the dedication and discipline to perpetually defy all odds and rational thought. If you were a completely rational, practical person, you'd almost never start a company. You would go get a job somewhere that's established. You would go do the safe thing, because the stats are on success.
You have to believe that it's rational to get it done. Even if it isn't in its nature, you have to believe that A will lead to B to C, and then eventually you'll get there. And most people don't get there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have to believe it's rational. I think you have to believe you'll beat the odds. That's always been my thing, is I know 90% of the companies fail.
Right.
Therefore, it's not rational to think that.
Through competitive advantage.
Hell yeah.
Which is rational. That idea is rational.
Yeah.
If you're better than others, then you will succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that also comes down to the space, right? I always find it interesting when people talk about kind of pitching and showing product market fit and value and what problem are you solving. The games industry has a very interesting challenge with that, because the problem you're solving is boredom and free time.
Right.
right? Like that's, you're providing a distraction and something for people to get invested in, and a community, and a way of connecting individuals. But it's not like, oh, we're saving people 3 hours in a day because we made accounting easier, or doing things like that. So
Right.
I think competitive advantage in the gaming space specifically can
That
be
is true.
challenging, right? Like what makes Angry Birds better than The Sims, better than World of Warcraft? Nothing, right? Audience, time, platform, a whole bunch of kind of arbitrary things, because at the end of the day, all of those depend on somebody having free time.
Right. But also making a choice to play Angry Birds over any other game.
Yeah.
So we're talking about emotional benefits here,
Yeah.
which isn't
Hard to
rational.
quantify.
You're right. You are right. Graeme, it's almost as if you know what you're talking about.
Sometimes. But back to one question you'd asked before is like, what did I do after that? I struggled. Like I spent a couple months kind of lost and not really sure who I was or what I did. I mean, I stopped doing any public speaking. I stopped being on any panels. I stopped taking meetings. I ended up extremely fortunate that a friend, Andy Moffat at Keshet, reached out and kind of gave me an opportunity to bring the IP over to Keshet, and with the idea of maybe working on it again, but also bring me in as the CEO for his sales and marketing accelerator, the kind of early stage investment group, and gave me a chance to kind of get re-inspired and get excited. And we started some amazing companies. Like, huge shout out to the ProPet team that's still rocking. They're doing amazing stuff there.
So how long was that period from the time RocketOwl failed to when you joined this new company?
So I would say it's hard to draw a line in the sand as to like when RocketOwl failed, right? There was a long kind of drawn out period where we kept trying to make things happen. Mm-hmm. I would say it was probably about 2 or 3 months of just nothing in my life after we'd closed the office. We'd been sued by our landlord. We were dealing with that. We were dealing with investors that were really upset, and just a couple months of like doing nothing to get myself back into a position where I could actually like function as a human being and try and start something again. And that was tough.
2 months sounds awfully short to go from rock bottom to,
Well,
I'm going to give it another shot.
I wouldn't say give it another shot, right? I went to help coach existing companies. I went to help go mentor and share some of what I'd learned and try and bring some of the expertise from that. There was still not the confidence there to try and start something again, or in myself as a leader or a speaker. And at the same time, I needed to do something because we needed to eat.
Yeah.
Like that was like at the end of RocketOwl, we hit a point where it was like, I had friends that I was meeting with every couple of weeks, and because they were generous and wanted to help us out, they were giving us food for dinners and to like keep ourselves alive while we tried to figure out what was next, because we had taken everything we had and everything we'd ever kind of imagined having and put it into trying to make RocketOwl happen. And I fundamentally believed, and to a large extent still believe, that when you take investment money from angels, VCs, whatever, you're making a commitment to do everything you possibly can to make that successful. That is your obligation. That is your responsibility as CEO, as a founder. And at the time, I very much had the philosophy of like, you either succeed or you die. And I had pretty much taken die as a literal statement of like, after that, I'm done, I'm out, no more. And yeah, the credit to the support network I had. There were one key investor that remained a huge champion for me, even after we'd kind of wrapped up the operations, and remained a positive force. The other co-founders, like we all leaned on each other a lot, because it was tough.
Mentally and emotionally, I would imagine it was also really hard to fight off that negative self-talk, to not internalize the events that have happened, mm-hmm. and sort of make it personal somehow. I
think it's personal no matter what, right? Like at the end of the day, if you were like I was the leader there. I was the CEO. I took that responsibility on. I was 21 when I started it, and about, I think, 25 when it stopped kind of actively operating. That defined who I was, right? Like that kind of defined who and what I was and what we did and what I had for the world. And it took a while to get it turned back around to, I have learned a lot. And I kind of owe it to myself to take everything I've learned from that experience and from what we did on that journey and apply it to the next companies, the next founders. And I think that was one of the most challenging things that it took a long time to gain perspective on. Like by the time I was 22, I had dealt with cap tables, funding rounds, I had hired people, I had fired people, we had established a board of directors, we had done director meeting, we had negotiated shareholder agreements, broken shareholder agreements, renegotiated shareholder agreements. We had done all of these things that was kind of a crash course in startup ecosystem, business, everything. I spent months getting coached by our CFO to learn how to fundamentally, intimately understand all of our financial information, all of the tools that you needed for both fundraising and running a company, and how to deal with taxes and HST and that whole world. And like that was hugely valuable. But when you're facing kind of failure at the company level, like you don't really think about that. You just think like, I failed, I screwed up everything, the world is over. Yeah. I'm just going to be depressed and die. And like that was very much the mentality at the end of RocketOwl, which was a journey.
I'm just going to let that sink in for a little bit. How does it feel to like think back to that period of your life?
It's interesting. I was having dinner with one of my best friends last night, who is a board member at RocketOwl. He's one of the main investors at RocketOwl, and continues to be one of my best friends. He was one of the two best men at my wedding. And we were talking about that a little bit, and it was kind of interesting of just entrepreneurship is kind of this perpetual journey of crazy highs. One day you're on top of the world, the next day everything is over and the world is awful, and then 30 minutes later it's like I'm on top of the world again. And I mean, sometimes those highs and lows can be months at a time, sometimes they can be minutes at a time. I mean, we've had similar things in our current life where it's like, oh no, we lost a big contract, there's $1 million we thought we were going to have that we won't, and then within half an hour, oh cool, 2 more leads came in and like it's going to double that and we think we can go win it. So there's always that kind of perpetual swing, and I think looking back on it, I remember the people that helped me get through it. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'm a huge proponent of founders having teams to found companies with. At least in my own world, whenever we're looking at investments at Keshet, when we're looking at teams that we wanted to support, teams are infinitely more attractive for me than solo founders when you're talking about taking on investment and taking on that like crazy high growth world, just because I've lived through the emotional challenges, and it can be extremely lonely and extremely frustrating to do it on your own. So having a team you can lean on, having other people that are kind of in it with you, makes a huge difference for being able to cope with that.
You can be accountable to one another.
Absolutely.
I think like usually as a solo founder, you'd like to think, well, I'm different. I'm rational. I have the ability to be rational. I don't need anybody else. This is all about efficiency. I get to make all the decisions.
Yep.
But we don't see the tough times coming. It's not anything we anticipate.
Yeah.
So after RocketOwl,
Yeah.
you became involved in a VC firm?
Yeah. So that was Keshet Technologies. It was kind of this hybrid brainchild of Andy Moffat here in town, and it was a little bit of early stage investment.
Who's that?
So he's a entrepreneur founder in Ottawa, one of my early mentors. He was one of our most avid green space players at RocketOwl. Never invested in the company, told us from day one we were going to fail, but was a huge player in the game and loved the game and was really, really passionate about what we were doing.
What reason did he give you?
Because games are a terrible business.
But that industry was flourishing at the time.
Flourishing in that 1 in 1,000 of them were hitting it, and 999 were dying in the App Store.
Right.
So I'm just saying,
I mean,
it was producing unicorns.
By that logic, you would tell anyone trying to develop an app not to, because most apps don't.
As a company that builds apps, we tell most companies not to build an app. Apps are rarely the solution for a lot of people's problems. If there's a reason and your customers need it or your employees need it, great. But if the idea is like, I'm going to build an app and it's going to be the next Instagram, don't do it. Like, help solve a really important problem. Like we deal with a lot of companies that are looking at how to go mobile. That's a big thing. How do you make your workforce more mobile? How do you reach your customers on mobile? Sometimes the answer is an app. Sometimes it's not. So I mean, just in that ecosystem, it's not always an app. And like at the time, it definitely was not go throw millions of dollars at building games.
I feel like this conversation so far kind of beautifully, it models a story arc. And I know where we're trying to get to, which is what you're working on now, which is Iversoft.
Yep.
But before we get there, there's
a period.
Yes.
Yeah, so I spent probably, I think, 3 years at Keshet with Andy and Debbie and working on essentially early stage SaaS companies. The whole philosophy at Keshet, which I still think is a brilliant model, was one of the biggest challenges when you invest early stage in a company is you're usually giving technical founders a bunch of money to go hire sales and marketing people. Right. And they burn through the first chunk of money hiring sales and marketing people, getting it wrong, learning all the things they should have known about how to hire sales and marketing people, and then they need to go get more money to go hire sales and marketing people again. Right. And the idea with Keshet was we had a sales and marketing team in-house that we would essentially bring into any company that we were investing in. We would put some capital in for development and kind of technical support, but part of the investment was the sales and marketing team. And I think that was an incredibly powerful model where rather than new founders or technical founders trying to figure out how to do sales and marketing, you had an already established team that was working well together, kind of brought in to immediately accelerate growth. And that's been going really well. We've got, one of the companies we started while we were there is like absolutely rocking right now. But during the course of that, I ended up meeting with Matt and Vicky, who were the two co-founders at Iversoft. At the time, they were looking at liquid cooling for computers engineering company. And they'd done a ton of research and they were pitching us for investment, and it was really interesting, but really not a fit for our world of SaaS companies. And so we ended up spending about a year during my time at Keshet going back and forth and kind of advising them and giving them feedback. And near the end, they were getting pretty serious about launching Ironside, which was their engineering company, and reached out to see if I'd be interested in being a CEO there and coming and help them lead a fundraising round and grow the company. And for me, it was kind of an exciting chance to get back into the more kind of intense gaming space of liquid cooling for high-end gaming computers, was back into esports, back into that world. But every single person I talked to in my network said, don't do it, hardware is awful. You've been software and digital your whole life, don't go do hardware. And so I ended up going back and saying, okay, I'm interested, but you guys have this other company, Iversoft, that's doing games, and they were starting to do software, like custom software development and app development. They had a bit of a team going there. And I said, I'll come in and do the engineering thing, but while that's taking time and you're doing research and we're figuring out manufacturing, I also want to contribute on the Iversoft side. Right.
How big was Iversoft then?
I think I was employee 9. Like I think I joined as the 8th or 9th person. Right. I think they'd fluctuated between kind of 7 and 12. At the time, the company was about 6 years old.
So when was this?
This was 4 years ago. 4 years ago this January.
Wow.
So January 15th, 2016 was my first day at Iversoft.
And how big is Iversoft now?
Now we're a little over 40 and growing like crazy.
This is the good part.
It's the light at the end of the tunnel.
I know. But there was supposed to be a build-up. Okay, so you've just joined Iversoft, but not 100%. It's just something that you were... So how did you get to this role that you're in?
To that place? Yeah, so I started out as CEO in the engineering company, and I think as director of marketing on Iversoft. And very quickly on, kind of three things happened in very quick succession that I think set the stage. One, we realized the engineering company was going to take longer to do than people had planned. So longer runway. Until that time, Iversoft had had a significant amount of revenue come from our 3 core mobile games. So we have 3 solitaire games that had been running since the inception of the App Store. And I think in February after I joined, we found out that the main ad provider for those games was going away. And that revenue, I think, shrank 60 or 70% within 30 days of that announcement. So a massive source of revenue disappeared. And I also found out one of the co-founders, Vicky, was going to have twins in a couple months.
Right.
And so all those things happen, and it's like, wow, okay, so engineering's going to take longer. It doesn't need as much of my attention right now. We need to do something about the game's revenue immediately. And Matt and Vicky are going to need time to do the twin thing. And so I ended up putting a lot more of my focus on Iversoft and really trying to elevate the brand, because at that point they had always kind of operated on this kind of like crazy engineering philosophy of keep your head down, do really good work, do no marketing, do no brand stuff. Like, this is a secret facility. We work on secret things, which is really cool, and some of the clients liked it. Really bad for growing a business. Nobody knew who they were, what they were doing. So yeah, started kind of building that brand, telling people about what we were doing, and
that's something. I'm picturing the technological innovation adoption curve.
Yep.
And what you guys had been doing, I would imagine, were good for all the tech enthusiasts. But at some point, you have to shift to the mass market, which involves branding. You being someone who doesn't have a business degree, I would imagine this was something that just came intuitively to you. So what did you do with Iversoft?
So I kind of evolved my role from the director of marketing into chief marketing. We built a brand. We kind of modernized some of the branding elements.
What does your brand stand for today?
Iversoft?
Yeah.
So we've grown from being a mobile company grew from mobile to doing web, from that into digital marketing, and then most recently, like this year, we've kind of evolved it into a digital consultancy. So we build digital solutions for brands all over the world. And that includes doing a lot of strategy work for companies that are looking to become more digital and more efficient and not sure how. And so a great example of that is coming into an organization that's global, that maybe has one set of tools in sales, one set of tools in marketing, one set of tools for customer fulfillment, and then they've got their product on the other side. And they're looking at ways of bringing it all together. And our teams have been able to kind of come in and build custom pieces that tie all of that together, migrate systems to modern tools, and that's kind of where we live now.
With the results
digital.
Being?
High growth. Customer satisfaction increases, efficiency increases. We've seen massive efficiency in some of the organizations we've been able to work with, where we can eliminate a huge amount of paperwork or manual labor, or even eliminate Excel documents that are getting emailed all over an organization with migration to new tools and kind of automated process.
Right, and I would also imagine helping the clients you're working with better understand their customers on an intimate level.
Absolutely.
Because after you get to a certain point, it can be difficult. You start seeing your customers as numbers.
Yeah.
What excites you most about Iversoft?
I love the kind of problems we're getting to work on and the brands we're getting to work with, and being able to see the results. Like, everything we do now is kind of an evolution of taking that engineering origin and that data science foundation that we had from Matt and Vicky, and applying it to marketing, applying it to mobile apps, applying it to sales process, and being able to pull real data that means something. So when we're working with clients, they can see where their money's going and what the results are that they're getting from it, and able to make significantly more informed decisions based on that. And I want to do that all over the world. Like, I think it's interesting to me that the whole world's all about product companies, and we have a couple products, but we're mostly a services company, and we love the services part of our world because we get to be on the leading edge of building automation, of gaming, of e-commerce, retail, and kind of take the best ideas from all of those entrepreneurs, all of those industries, and apply it to everything that we do.
So this is something you're committed to in the long run, because
Absolutely.
being a services company, there's usually like your exit option would be just continuing to do more of the same through and
So
get acqui-hired.
Everyone tells me there's no future and there's no growth in services companies. But if you look at companies like Accenture and Deloitte and E&Y, like if you look at the global consultancies, they're some of the biggest companies in the world. So I mean, we haven't kind of made this like super public as a positioning, but moving into the digital consultancy world, we're competing against those companies for the contracts we're winning. So if Accenture can do $39 billion of this work in a year, there's a lot of room for us to grow. And what we're seeing is digital moves so fast in so many ways in different industries. It's really challenging for companies to keep innovative teams in-house. It's hard to retain talent working on the same product and same kind of problem all the time.
Right.
And it's hard to have people coming into your team that have exposure from other industries.
Would they even know what to look for?
No. And that's where we're finding kind of a niche and being able to work with companies, because we're coming with modern current experience from every other industry and bringing it to them and saying, here's how we push the boundaries for you guys. Here's what we do now.
Right.
And that's super exciting.
Well, okay, I was going to ask, how do you know this is what you want to dedicate the rest of your life to?
Because I have fun every day.
You answered my question before I even asked it.
Yeah, because I can sit down here today and talk to you about how shitty it was when RocketOwl blew up, to talk to you about being at the depths of depression 5 years ago, of kind of the emotional damage of sitting in front of people that gave you millions of dollars to do something and telling them you failed. Going through the experience of letting 20 employees go and not being able to always make payroll. I can talk about that because of how far I've been able to come and how excited I am about the things we're doing now. And that's, for me at least, been really positive and exciting. And I get up every day super keen to see what's next. Like we're in virtual reality technology. We're starting to do a bunch of blockchain security projects. We're getting to build IP and develop talent in the most exciting industries in the world, and our business is viable as long as people continue to need to be digital and need to be in that space and need strategy and services there. And I don't see that changing.
It might sound a little silly, but what does digital even mean?
So digital's everything. Like that's a bit of why we've tried to move towards digital, because we started out doing mobile, and it was just mobile apps, and we were kind of known as the app company.
Yeah.
But then the people we were building apps for needed websites.
Right.
And it was like, okay, well, it's a lot easier for them to work with just one company to do mobile and web.
Right.
And then we shipped a bunch of websites and apps, and the most common question we got was like, okay, now how do we do the marketing? Who do we work with? And so we referred work out. But then 2 years ago, we bought a digital marketing company and said, okay, well, we'll bring that in too. And now you can do the whole web, mobile, digital marketing presence here. And then we started getting questions about, okay, well, what should be the next thing in our products? How do we integrate this in the organization? How do we get people using it more? And that was more on the strategy side. And so we built out a strategy division, and that's been kind of merged in. So when you start looking at that whole ecosystem, the only thing that really defines that is that we're doing strategy for the digital world. Like that's what we do, and that's what we're really, really good at. And it's not just the strategy of, oh, we're going to give you a roadmap, but we have the engineering team and the talent to build that roadmap and execute against it, which is
to help
exciting.
Your clients fulfill what need, because all of these are tools in the end, websites, applications.
Absolutely.
Those tools will change over time,
Absolutely.
but there are core needs that don't.
Yeah. That's where strategy comes in. Is what is the point of this? Like this the number one thing that inspired us to get into the strategy space is we had a couple scenarios where we built incredible mobile apps for companies. And 6 months after kind of delivering them and seeing reasonable adoption and growth, we heard from the companies that they weren't super happy. I was like, I'm like really sorry to hear that. Why aren't you happy? It's like, oh, we really needed it to move this metric. This is the thing we were trying to address.
Right.
And it was like, oh, okay, well, if that was the problem, we wouldn't have recommended an app. You needed like a really focused marketing campaign. You needed to improve the conversion on your website. Like there were other things to do. And so having switched to strategy first and being able to go in and do that engagement first, we come away with a really clear picture of what are the business objectives. And then it's a question of looking at the digital arsenal of what we can do and all the tools and tactics we have. How do we address those company problems? Is it retention? Is it either client or employee? Is it customer acquisition? Is it we spend 40 hours a week doing paperwork? Wouldn't it be cool if that was automated? And so coming away with a clear picture on that gives us a real chance to find the right solutions.
Really solves an issue right now. They say the agency model is dying.
Absolutely.
And that's because for the most part it doesn't involve strategy first. Marketing agencies, are hired guns these days.
They're siloed.
And if you start with exactly, and if you have a client that comes in asking perhaps the wrong question to begin with, then they don't get the results that they want, it can be really challenging.
And in that scenario, it's no fault on either side of the table, right? The company may not know what question to ask. And the marketing agency, if they've got a really good team of PR and ads and creative, they're not going to go in and look at the back-end plumbing of their CRM or their website or how data is moving around the organization. That's where we've been able to kind of carve out a really competitive niche. Is we're not just going to sell you an app because you show up at the door asking for an app. If you show up at our front door asking for an app, back to what I said before, we're going to say, why do you need an app? Show us the plan that says why you need an app. Because if we just build you an app because you said I want to have an app and be mobile, you're one of 10 million apps in the store. You're probably not going to be happy with where that goes unless you've got a plan that supports it.
It takes a lot of guts to be a company that does that.
Yeah.
A vision-led company.
Yeah.
Because I can name, countless number of competitors who would probably just take the money.
Yeah. Well, and that's some of that is benefit of being 10 years in the business, right? We were able to look back a couple of years ago and say, okay, let's take our top 5 most successful clients and take our top 5 kind of least successful, biggest horror stories. What are the commonalities? Where did they go wrong? What happened? And a common thread with the ones that had gone poorly was it was kind of well documented that there was disagreement, but we just agreed and built whatever.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if all you do is shut up and build what somebody's asking you to build, if you know it's not the right thing, if you know it's not going to get the results, there's no winning in saying we told you so 6 months later. Nobody appreciates that. We would rather be the company that walks away and says, like, look, not for us. Maybe we're going to miss out on a couple people who have a vision we don't have. That's a risk we're willing to take because we'd rather be the people that can say, in our experience, this is not going to happen and we're not going to take your money to do it and have you unhappy that we did months down the road.
So 3 weeks ago, you were officially announced as the CEO of Iversoft.
Yeah.
Before that, I think you were playing that role, but now it's official.
Yeah, Iversoft was a bit of a unique scenario in that we've never had a CEO. When I joined, like Matt and Vicky were the original co-founders. Vicky was our CTO, Matt was the COO, and that was kind of the way they'd always run the company, 50-50. And so when I came on as a partner, we kind of split that I came in as the CMO, and between the three of us, we made all the decisions. And I would say that was a really good model and continues to be a really good model. But as we were kind of looking forward and realizing we were going to pass 50 people soon and that growth was accelerating, it wasn't efficient. It wasn't a sustainable model that was going to work for us long term. And we needed to do a lot of kind of self-reflection on where do we bring the most value, where do we need people in the roles, and for a lot of us that was pretty straightforward. Like Vicky has been kind of the visionary technical mind behind the company since day one. She is our CTO. She's a leader for all of the development resources. She is a brilliant mentor, and
wasn't she also one of the original developers on? Well,
so she was a developer at Apple before starting Iversoft, which is part of where Iversoft came from. Was Vicky's experience at Apple gave her kind of an edge when iOS was released, that she'd already worked in the language, she'd already worked with the environment, and so was able to jump in super quickly and be one of the first people in Toronto to have any mobile experience when the iPhone dropped.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and the company's name is a nod to her last name. I mean, Iversoft and Iverson. Her grandfather is a Turing Award winner. He invented a couple computer languages, and so like computer science is in her DNA to the core. And then so Vicky as CTO was kind of a natural, and we wanted to double down on that and make sure that she was successful in that role. And a lot of Matt's world this year is focused on building partnerships and helping us grow in new markets. And so having him shift into the chief relationship officer role that he's in now was kind of key. And then somebody needed to kind of keep momentum growing on and for growth and the direction of the company. And so that's the role I've been able to step into, and super excited about it.
Name one thing you're excited about in the next year. I know there are probably
one
many.
thing.
Just one. Doesn't have to be the thing that you're most excited about, but what pops into mind?
I'm excited to see the evolution in the company as we keep growing. Like, I like new challenges. That's always been a big thing for me. I've been involved in countless companies that have scaled up to 20, 30 people now as an advisor, as a leader. But I've never done 50, 100, and beyond that. And I'm excited to learn. I'm excited to be part of that journey and to kind of expand my own skill set and see how we take that on and the kind of people that come in and the culture that shapes around that. I'm really excited about that.
Okay, I have one last question for you.
Bring it on.
If you could go back in time and talk to 25-year-old Graeme, who basically just at the closure of RocketOwl, who's going through, a dark, dark period, what would you say to him? Because this is a funny question, because in a way, I'm sure there's a part of you that doesn't regret the events that have happened because ultimately they led you here. But if you could just go back and if you could be among his support system, what would you say to him?
I don't think there's a whole lot I could say that would change that moment. And as you said, the journey I went through made a profound impact, and I think was a very good thing. The one piece of advice I think I would give myself is move faster to surround yourself with positive people. I think I spent a lot of time afterwards trying to surround myself with people that were angry and upset at what had happened and the fact that we hadn't been successful, because I felt like that was what I needed to carry, and that was on me. And I stand by some of that, but I think that made it a lot more challenging to try and rebuild and recover. And it took years after that to get to a place where I was probably in a healthy position. So yeah, I think that would be the one thing, is move faster to reinforce positive influence in your life.
And it's kind of counterintuitive in a way, because when you're going through massive, trials and tribulations,
yeah,
I would imagine and also I can speak from personal experience, you tend to isolate yourself because you don't feel, when you're at your lowest, that's not when you feel like you want to be amongst
positive people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like you push away a lot of people that are trying to give you hope and positivity, and you dwell on the people that are saying they trusted you and you let them down, and that you failed and everything is awful now, and like it sucks. Like that's the one thing I'll say is I have so much respect for founders that have gone through a failed startup, especially a public one. Like that's not publicly traded, but like a public one where you've been in the news, you've been in the media, you've had a lot of coverage, and when that doesn't work, it is hard to reinvent yourself and come out stronger. And I think I have nothing but respect for people that have done it. And yeah, you learn a lot though, and I think that helps with the next one.
So the lesson of this interview so far is?
Persistence. It's the most probably cliche piece of advice in entrepreneurship is persist without exception. Stay positive and keep moving.
I want to end on that note because that's a positive note and one that we can carry with us into our day-to-day lives. Thank you so much, Graeme.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
This is one of the most compelling conversations I've had.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
This is seriously like it. This was a really compelling conversation, and
Thank you.
I am so appreciative that you made yourself available and your story available and open to this audience, because whoever's watching or listening, I'm sure that they too would be appreciative, because it takes a lot to be vulnerable. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I think I told you this when you invited me, is if talking about some of the experience, if sharing a little bit of the story can help somebody else get through it, or recognize that even though everything usually looks shiny on the outside, you never know what other people are going through. So reach out to your fellow entrepreneurs, reach out to other founders, take the coffee, take 5 minutes, and tell people it'll be okay, because you can get through it.
On that note.
Cool.
I want to end on that because that was so good.